Seth, thank you for speaking to CNBC. Is this the year that inflation strikes back?
It is not. In fact, our forecast for inflation, if you take PCE inflation, which is the inflation for which the Fed sets a target, we think it's going to end the year at about 1.7%. So actually, it's going to disappoint the FOMC for yet another year below what they think it's going to do.
If that's the case, where do we end up in the rate hike cycle this year?
So our baseline view right now is 2 rate hikes of risk to a third. And coming out of the minutes from the December meeting that they just put out a week or so ago, they seem to still have some confidence on where things are going. But our view, they're going to end up getting kind of disappointed.
So you seem more in line where the market is at the moment, but I've heard guests say they're looking all the way up to 4. And part of this assumption is we're getting this huge stimulus, a projected huge stimulus, I should say, in the way of tax reform.
Right.
The latest Fed minutes showed some uncertainty. Perhaps the FOMC members are holding out for more evidence of what the real impact from tax reform will be, particularly when it comes to not just inflation broadly speaking, but wage inflation. What is your expectation?
So I completely agree that the FOMC is going to have to wait for more evidence. They talk about themselves being data dependent, and I don't think they've always explained that sufficiently clearly. They have a forecast for where they think the economy is going, and they want to see the data confirm that forecast. We think, especially, so you asked about wage inflation, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that in some long-run equilibrium, wage inflation should be equal to the growth rate of productivity, so how much can workers produce, and then the increase in prices for the goods that they produce. Inflation is running, call it 1.4% or so. Productivity growth is just a little bit below 1%. So we're not actually that far out of equilibrium for where wage inflation should be. Now, we've got a tight labor market, so we think that should keep boosting wage inflation, and it's going to creep up, and that's in our forecast. But we're not so far out of bounds the way some people characterize it.
And we have heard from some companies, a decent handful already, who have said we're going to increase wages as a result of tax reform. Some are just one-off bonuses, sure. So is this more of a transitory impact, or ultimately will this alone have a real impact on the wage front?
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen. So our view of the tax package, or cutting taxes, the way the Joint Committee on Taxation scored it is pretty sizable, very front-loaded to the first couple of years. There will be more money flowing into the economy, and as a result, more spending. So it would be surprising if there weren't some increase in wages, some increase in employment. But we don't think it's going to be a game changer. So for example, we think GDP growth in 2018 will be 2.4%, just a quarter of a percentage point faster than without the tax cuts.